Maria Santos woke up before her alarm every morning. She did this because she liked being the first one awake in the barracks. The quiet time helped her prepare for the day ahead. She would sit on the edge of her narrow military bed and look out the small window at the empty training grounds. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky in soft orange colors. At 24 years old, Maria had been in the Army for 3 years. She was proud of her service record. Her uniform was always perfect. Every button shined. Every crease was sharp. Her black boots reflected the morning light like mirrors. Other soldiers often asked her how she kept everything so neat. Maria would just smile and say it was about discipline. But the real reason Maria worked so hard to be perfect was different. She had something to hide, something that made her feel different from all the other soldiers. When she looked in the mirror each morning, she could see it clearly. The long scar that stretched across her stomach. It was thick and white against her brown skin. The scar told a story she never wanted to share. Maria had joined the Army right after her 21st birthday. She remembered the day she walked into the recruitment office. The sergeant behind the desk was a large man with kind eyes. He asked her why she wanted to serve her country. Maria told him she wanted to be strong. She wanted to protect people. What she did not tell him was that she needed to prove to herself that she was not weak. The scar came from a night 2 years before she joined the Army. Maria had been working at a small diner in her hometown. It was a quiet place that served coffee and sandwiches to truck drivers and factory workers. She worked the evening shift, cleaning tables and taking orders until the place closed at midnight. The job did not pay much, but Maria needed the money to help her mother with rent. One night in October, Maria was walking home after work. The streets were dark and empty. Most of the streetlights in her neighborhood were broken. She always took the same route home because it was the shortest way. But that night, someone was waiting in the shadows between 2 old buildings. A man jumped out and grabbed her. He had something sharp in his hand. Maria tried to fight back, but he was stronger. The sharp object cut across her stomach before she could get away. Maria never told anyone the whole story about that night. She went to the hospital alone. The doctors asked many questions, but she gave short answers.
They stitched up her wound and told her to rest.
But Maria could not rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she remembered the fear she felt. She remembered feeling helpless. That feeling stayed with her for months. After the wound healed, Maria looked at her scar every day. It reminded her of that terrible night. It reminded her that she had been a victim. She hated that feeling. She decided she would never be helpless again. That is when she started thinking about joining the Army. She wanted to learn how to fight. She wanted to become someone who could protect others instead of needing protection. Basic training was hard for Maria, but she never complained. She ran faster than most of the men in her group. She did more push-ups than soldiers who were bigger and stronger. When other recruits were tired and wanted to quit, Maria kept going. Her drill sergeant noticed her determination. He told the other instructors that Maria Santos was special. She had the heart of a warrior. But even during basic training, Maria was careful about her scar. She always changed clothes when others were not looking. During medical checkups, she wore shirts that covered her stomach. When they had to do physical fitness tests that required removing shirts, Maria always positioned herself where fewer people could see her. She became an expert at hiding her secret. Now, 3 years later, Maria was considered one of the best soldiers in her unit. She had been promoted twice. Her commanding officers trusted her with important assignments. The younger soldiers looked up to her as an example of what a good soldier should be. But every morning when she woke up, Maria still felt the weight of her secret. Her closest friend in the Army was a soldier named David Chen. David was from California and always had a joke ready to make people laugh. He and Maria often ate meals together and talked about their families back home. David sometimes asked Maria about the small scars he could see on her hands from training exercises. He would share stories about his own injuries from football in high school. But Maria never told him about the scar that really mattered. The barracks where Maria lived had 20 beds arranged in 2 rows. Most of the other soldiers were men, but there were 4 women, including Maria. The women looked out for each other. They shared advice about dealing with difficult officers and helped each other with personal problems. But even with these women who understood the challenges of being female soldiers, Maria kept her secret. Colonel Davidson was the commanding officer for their entire unit. He was a tall man with gray hair who had served in the army for over 20 years. The colonel was known for being fair but strict. He expected excellence from every soldier under his command. Maria respected him greatly. She had worked hard to earn his approval over the past 3 years. Colonel Davidson often used Maria as an example when training new recruits. He would point to her perfect uniform and disciplined behavior. Maria knew that her secret could not stay hidden forever. Sometimes at night, lying in her narrow bed, she worried about what would happen if others found out about her scar. Would they think she was damaged? Would they question whether she belonged in the army? Would Colonel Davidson still respect her if he knew the truth about her past? These worries followed Maria everywhere, but she never let them show on her face. Every morning she put on her uniform with pride. Every day she worked to be the best soldier she could be. She helped train new recruits and completed every mission assigned to her. But underneath her confident appearance, Maria carried the weight of her secret like a heavy pack that never came off. As Maria finished getting dressed that morning, she looked at herself in the small mirror above her footlocker. Her uniform was perfect as always. Her hair was pulled back according to regulations. She looked like any other professional soldier ready for another day of service. But Maria knew that appearances could be deceiving. She had learned that lesson on a dark October night 5 years ago, and she had been living with the consequences ever since. The Tuesday morning started like every other day at Fort Henderson. Maria was leading her squad through their regular morning drills in the main courtyard. The sun was bright and warm for early spring. She watched as the 8 soldiers under her command practiced their formations. They moved like a well-oiled machine. Maria felt proud watching them work together so smoothly. Private Johnson was struggling to keep up with the marching pace. Maria noticed his left foot was slightly out of step with the others. She called out corrections in a clear, strong voice. Johnson quickly fixed his mistake and gave her a grateful nod. Maria had learned that being a good leader meant paying attention to small details. It also meant helping soldiers improve without making them feel embarrassed. Sergeant Williams approached the training area. He was an older man with deep lines around his eyes from years of squinting in the sun. Williams had been at Fort Henderson longer than anyone else. He knew every rule and regulation by memory. Maria respected him because he treated all soldiers fairly, whether they were men or women. "Santos, your squad looks sharp today," Williams said as he stopped beside Maria. "Keep up the good work." Maria smiled and thanked him. Praise from Williams meant something because he did not give compliments easily. She felt good about how well her soldiers were performing. They had been working together for 6 months now. Each person knew their job and did it well. At exactly 9:30 in the morning, everything changed. A loud siren began wailing across the entire base. The sound was sharp and urgent. It cut through the morning air like a knife. All the soldiers stopped their training immediately. They looked around with confusion and concern. This was not the usual signal for any scheduled drill or exercise. Maria had heard this particular siren only twice before in her 3 years at Fort Henderson. It meant emergency inspection. Her stomach dropped as she realized what was happening. Emergency inspections were serious business. They happened when someone reported problems on the base. Usually it meant they were looking for contraband or checking for security violations. "All personnel report to the main assembly area immediately," came the announcement over the loudspeakers. The voice belonged to Colonel Davidson himself. Maria could hear the authority in his tone even through the static of the old speaker system. "This is not a drill. All soldiers must report for immediate inspection." Maria's squad looked to her for direction. She could see worry in their eyes. Emergency inspections made everyone nervous because they were thorough and unpredictable. Maria kept her voice calm and steady as she gave orders. "You heard the colonel. Everyone fall in and march to assembly. Keep your formation tight and your heads up. We have nothing to worry about." But as Maria said those words, she felt her own worry growing in her chest. Emergency inspections sometimes included clothing searches. She had managed to avoid those situations before, but there was no way to predict what would happen today. Her hand unconsciously moved toward her stomach, then quickly dropped to her side. The march to the assembly area took 10 minutes. As they walked, Maria could see soldiers coming from all directions across the base. Everyone looked serious and concerned. Some of the newer recruits looked scared. The more experienced soldiers maintained better control of their emotions. But Maria could see tension in their faces too. When they reached the main assembly area, Maria was surprised by how many people were there. It looked like every single person stationed at Fort Henderson had been called. There were at least 300 soldiers standing in perfect rows. The area was completely silent except for the sound of boots on concrete as the last few groups arrived. Colonel Davidson stood at the front with several other officers. Maria recognized most of them, including Major Peters from security and Captain Rodriguez from military police. The presence of so many high-ranking officers made it clear that this inspection was more serious than usual. "We have received reports of contraband materials somewhere on this base," Colonel Davidson announced. His voice carried easily across the silent crowd. "Every soldier will be thoroughly searched. Every locker will be inspected. Every barracks room will be examined. We will find what we are looking for." Maria felt her heart start beating faster. Thorough searches meant they would be very careful and complete. There would be no way to hide or avoid the inspection. She tried to calm herself by thinking about her clean record. She had never broken any rules. She had nothing illegal in her possession. But the fear of exposure still grew stronger. The inspection teams began forming. There were both male and female officers on each team. This was standard procedure to ensure that searches could be conducted properly for all soldiers. Maria watched as they organized themselves with clipboards and official forms. Everything was being done by strict military protocol. "All soldiers will remain in formation until called," Colonel Davidson continued. "You will cooperate fully with inspection teams. Any resistance or failure to comply will result in immediate disciplinary action." Maria's squad was positioned about halfway back in the formation. She estimated it would be at least an hour before they reached her group. That gave her time to think, but it also gave her time to worry. She tried to focus on breathing steadily and maintaining her military bearing. Around her, she could hear quiet whispers between soldiers. Everyone was trying to figure out what kind of contraband the officers were looking for. Some people guessed it might be drugs. Others thought it could be stolen military equipment. A few suggested it might be unauthorized weapons or electronics. Maria barely heard these conversations. Her mind was focused entirely on one concern. If the inspection team required her to remove her shirt, everyone would see her scar. There would be no way to hide it or explain it away. The secret she had kept for 3 years would be exposed in front of hundreds of people. She watched as the first inspection team approached the front rows of soldiers. They were working systematically and thoroughly. Each soldier was being searched individually while others watched. Maria could see that some searches required soldiers to remove outer clothing. Her mouth felt dry as she realized there was no escape from what was coming. The wait felt endless. Maria tried to prepare herself mentally for what might happen. She thought about different ways she could handle the situation if her scar was revealed. Maybe she could give a brief explanation and hope people would not ask too many questions. Maybe she could request a private inspection, though she doubted that would be allowed during an emergency procedure. As the inspection teams moved closer to her position, Maria's anxiety increased. She had spent 3 years building a reputation as a strong, capable soldier. In a few minutes, everything might change. The scar that had driven her to join the army might also be the thing that changed how everyone saw her. She stood perfectly still in formation, watching the inspection teams work their way through the crowd, knowing that her carefully guarded secret was about to be exposed. The inspection team was now only 3 rows away from Maria. She could hear every command clearly as they moved through the soldiers. Her hands were sweating despite the cool morning air. She wiped them on her uniform pants, hoping nobody would notice. The weight was becoming unbearable. Staff Sergeant Lopez was leading the inspection team that would reach Maria's row. She was a small woman with sharp eyes who had been at Fort Henderson for 5 years. Lopez was known for being thorough and fair. She never rushed through procedures and always followed regulations exactly. Maria had worked with Lopez on several training exercises and respected her professionalism. "Next group, step forward," Lopez called out. Maria's row was next. 8 soldiers moved forward in unison, maintaining perfect formation. Maria was third from the left. She tried to keep her breathing steady and her expression neutral. Around her, she could feel the tension from her fellow soldiers. Private Chen, who was standing to Maria's right, looked nervous. He was one of the younger soldiers in the unit and had never been through an emergency inspection before. Maria wanted to reassure him, but speaking during inspection was not allowed. She could only hope that her calm appearance might help him feel more confident. Lopez began with the first soldier in line. It was Private Matthews, a tall man from Texas who had joined the Army 6 months ago. The inspection started with a search of his pockets and equipment. Lopez checked his identification tags and examined his uniform for any irregularities. Everything appeared normal. "Remove your jacket and outer shirt," Lopez instructed Matthews. This was standard procedure, but Maria felt her stomach tighten when she heard the command. Matthews complied quickly, folding his clothes neatly and holding them at his side. Lopez examined the clothing carefully, checking all pockets and seams. She found nothing unusual. The second soldier was Private Garcia, one of the few women in Maria's unit. The inspection followed the same pattern. Lopez was professional and efficient, treating Garcia with the same respect she had shown Matthews. When Garcia was asked to remove her outer clothing, a female officer stepped forward to conduct that part of the search. This gave Maria a small amount of hope that her own inspection might be handled with some privacy. Then it was Maria's turn. She stepped forward when Lopez called her name. Her military training took over, and she moved with confidence despite the fear building inside her. Lopez looked at Maria's identification and checked her uniform. Everything was in perfect order, as always. "Sergeant Santos, please empty your pockets," Lopez instructed. Maria removed the few items she carried. Her wallet, a small notepad, and a pen. Lopez examined each item carefully and found nothing problematic. Maria felt a brief moment of relief, thinking the worst might be over. But then Lopez noticed something that made her pause. She was looking at the way Maria was standing. Maria had unconsciously positioned herself to keep her midsection turned slightly away from the crowd. It was a subtle movement, but Lopez was trained to notice small details that might indicate someone was hiding something. "Sergeant Santos, please face forward and stand at attention," Lopez said. Her voice was still professional, but there was a hint of curiosity in her tone. Maria complied immediately, turning to face the crowd of watching soldiers. She kept her shoulders back and her chin up, maintaining perfect military posture. Lopez continued her inspection, checking Maria's equipment and outer clothing. When she found nothing unusual, she moved to the next phase. This was the moment Maria had been dreading. "Remove your jacket and shirt for inspection," Lopez commanded. The words seemed to echo in Maria's ears. She felt as if time had slowed down. Every eye in her immediate area was focused on her. She could see Colonel Davidson watching from his position at the front of the formation. Maria's hands moved to the buttons of her uniform jacket. Her fingers felt clumsy and slow, but she forced herself to maintain steady movements. She removed the jacket and folded it neatly, just as she had seen the other soldiers do. The morning air felt cool against her arms. Now came the moment she had feared for 3 years. Lopez was waiting for her to remove her uniform shirt. Maria looked straight ahead, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the crowd. She began unbuttoning her shirt with hands that trembled slightly. She prayed that her hands would stay steady enough that nobody would notice her nervousness. The shirt came off, revealing the standard-issue tank top underneath. Maria hoped desperately that this would be enough for the inspection. But Lopez was being thorough with everyone, and Maria's turn would be no different. "The undershirt as well, Sergeant," Lopez said quietly. She seemed to sense Maria's discomfort and kept her voice low, but in the silence of the assembly area, even quiet words carried to the nearby soldiers. Maria closed her eyes for just a moment, gathering her courage. When she opened them, she saw David Chen in the crowd. He was watching with the same curious expression as everyone else. She saw Private Johnson, who she had been helping with his marching that morning. She saw dozens of faces looking in her direction. With one swift movement, Maria pulled the tank top over her head. The scar was immediately visible to everyone within 50 feet of where she stood. It stretched across her stomach like a pale lightning bolt against her brown skin. The scar was thick and irregular, clearly not from any military training or common accident. The reaction was instant and uncomfortable. Several soldiers gasped audibly. Others took half steps backward, as if they had seen something shocking. Private Chen's mouth fell open in surprise. Some of the younger soldiers began whispering to each other, pointing in Maria's direction. But it was Colonel Davidson's reaction that surprised everyone the most. The colonel was known throughout Fort Henderson for his iron composure. He had served in combat zones and had seen terrible injuries without flinching. He never showed emotion during inspections or training exercises. He was famous for his ability to stare down any soldier, no matter how intimidating they might be. Yet when Colonel Davidson saw Maria's scar, something changed in his expression. His usual stern confidence seemed to waver. He looked directly at the scar for only a moment before turning his gaze away. His jaw clenched tight, and for the first time anyone could remember, the colonel appeared uncomfortable. He looked down at his clipboard and seemed unable to look back in Maria's direction. The inspection continued, but the atmosphere had completely changed. Lopez finished her examination of Maria's clothing quickly and professionally. She found nothing problematic and instructed Maria to get dressed. But the damage was already done. Maria's secret was no longer secret. As Maria put her clothing back on, she could feel the weight of hundreds of stares. Some soldiers looked at her with pity. Others seemed curious or confused. A few appeared uncomfortable, as if they had seen something they wished they had not seen. The whispered conversations had started immediately, and were spreading through the crowd like ripples on a pond. Maria finished dressing and returned to her position in formation. She stood perfectly straight, maintaining her military bearing despite the humiliation she felt. But inside she knew that everything had changed. The careful image she had built over 3 years had been shattered in a matter of minutes. The inspection teams continued their work, but Maria noticed that people kept glancing in her direction. Even Colonel Davidson seemed different. When he gave commands to the assembled soldiers, he avoided looking directly at Maria's section of the formation. The man who had never backed down from anything seemed shaken by what he had seen. As the inspection finally concluded and soldiers began returning to their regular duties, Maria realized that her life at Fort Henderson would never be the same again. The 3 days after the inspection were the longest of Maria's military career. She woke up each morning hoping that people had forgotten what they saw, but the stares and whispers followed her everywhere she went. The mess hall became particularly difficult. When Maria entered with her food tray, conversations would suddenly stop. Soldiers would look up at her, then quickly look away when she made eye contact. On Wednesday morning, Maria sat down at her usual table with David Chen and 2 other soldiers from her unit. The silence was uncomfortable. David, who normally filled every moment with jokes and stories, seemed to struggle with what to say. He kept starting sentences and then stopping himself. Finally, he cleared his throat and spoke carefully. "Maria, if you ever want to talk about anything, you know I'm here," he said quietly. His voice was different than usual. Instead of his normal cheerful tone, he sounded like he was talking to someone who was very sick. Maria appreciated his kindness, but she hated how he was treating her like she might break. Private Garcia, who sat across from Maria, nodded in agreement. "We all care about you," she said softly. "Whatever happened to you before the army, it doesn't change who you are now." Garcia meant well, but her words made Maria feel worse. She did not want to be seen as someone who needed special care or gentle treatment. The worst part was not knowing what stories people were creating about her scar. Maria could see small groups of soldiers talking quietly and looking in her direction. She knew they were discussing her, but she could not hear what they were saying. Her imagination filled in the blanks, and most of what she imagined was terrible. During afternoon training exercises, Maria overheard 2 soldiers talking near the equipment storage area. They did not see her approaching from behind a stack of supply boxes. "I heard she was in some kind of terrible car accident before she joined up," said Private Morrison, a young man from Ohio who had arrived at Fort Henderson only 2 months ago. "My cousin said scars like that come from broken glass cutting you up real bad." "No way," replied Corporal Williams, shaking his head. "My brother works at a hospital and he said that kind of scar comes from surgery. Maybe she had some kind of disease or cancer or something. That's probably why she's so tough all the time. She's been through worse than the rest of us." Maria felt sick listening to their conversation. Neither soldier was being mean, but they were completely wrong about her situation. She wanted to walk away, but she was frozen in place listening to them create stories about her life. "Whatever it was, it must have been really bad," Morrison continued. "Did you see how even Colonel Davidson looked away? That man has seen everything, and he couldn't handle looking at her scar. That tells you something serious happened to her." Maria finally forced herself to move away from the conversation, but the words stayed in her mind. The idea that Colonel Davidson had been affected by seeing her scar bothered her more than anything else. She had worked so hard to earn his respect over the past 3 years. Now she wondered if he saw her as damaged or weak. Thursday brought new challenges. During morning formation, Maria noticed that Colonel Davidson was giving assignments differently than usual. Normally, he would look directly at each soldier as he gave them their daily tasks. But when he reached Maria, his eyes focused somewhere just over her left shoulder. His voice remained professional, but something had changed. "Sergeant Santos, you will be working with the new recruits in classroom training today," he said without making eye contact. This was unusual because Maria typically led outdoor training exercises. Classroom duty was usually given to soldiers who were injured or being disciplined for something. After formation ended, Maria approached Sergeant Williams, who had been watching the exchange. "Williams, did I do something wrong?" Maria asked directly. "The colonel seems to be treating me differently since the inspection." Williams looked uncomfortable with the question. He glanced around to make sure nobody else was listening before he answered. "Santos, you're a good soldier. One of the best we have," he said carefully. "But sometimes when people learn new things about someone, it takes time for them to adjust. Give it some time. Things will get back to normal." But Maria was not sure things would ever be normal again. As the days passed, she noticed more changes in how people treated her. Some soldiers had started speaking to her in softer voices, as if she was fragile. Others seemed nervous around her, like they were afraid of saying the wrong thing. A few avoided her completely. The female soldiers in her barracks were trying to be supportive, but their kindness felt different than before. Private Jackson, who had the bed next to Maria's, started offering to help with tasks that Maria had always done herself. Lieutenant Parker began checking on Maria more frequently than necessary, asking if she needed anything or wanted to talk. "We know it must be hard to have your privacy invaded like that," Parker said one evening as they prepared for bed. "If you want to request a transfer or take some time off, I could help you with the paperwork." Maria was shocked by the suggestion. "Why would I want a transfer?" she asked.
I love being here.
"This is my home." Parker looked surprised by Maria's response. "I just thought that after what happened, you might want a fresh start somewhere where people don't know about your past." The conversation made Maria realize how drastically things had changed. People were no longer seeing her as a strong soldier who belonged at Fort Henderson. They were seeing her as someone who might need to run away and hide. The thought made her angry, but she kept her emotions under control. Friday brought the most difficult moment yet. Maria was walking past the recreation building when she heard loud laughter coming from inside. Through the open door, she could see a group of soldiers watching television and joking around. As she got closer, she heard part of their conversation. "I'm telling you, something big must have happened to her," said a voice she recognized as belonging to Private Kelly. "Normal people don't get scars like that from accidents. She probably got mixed up with some dangerous people before she joined the army." "Maybe she was in a gang or something," suggested another soldier. "That would explain why she's so good at fighting and why she never talks about her life before the military." Maria felt her face get hot with anger and embarrassment. These soldiers were creating completely false stories about her past. They were making her sound like she had been involved in criminal activities. The unfairness of it made her want to march into the room and tell them the truth, but she knew that would only make things worse. Instead, she walked quickly back to the barracks, her mind racing with frustration. She had joined the army to become stronger and to serve her country with honor. She had worked harder than most soldiers, and had earned her rank through dedication and skill. But now, because of a scar that represented the worst night of her life, people were questioning her character and her belonging in the military. As Maria lay in her bed that night, she could hear quiet conversations happening around her in the dark barracks. She was sure that at least some of those whispered words were about her. The scar that had driven her to become a soldier was now threatening to destroy everything she had built. She had survived the attack that gave her the scar, but she was not sure she could survive having her secret exposed. The weight of all the stares, whispers, and changed treatment was becoming unbearable. Maria realized that something had to change, but she was not sure what she could do to fix the situation. She only knew that she could not continue living under the constant scrutiny and assumptions of her fellow soldiers. 3 weeks had passed since the inspection, and Maria felt like she was drowning in the changed atmosphere around her. Every morning became harder to face. The soldier who had once been excited to start each day now dreaded leaving her bed. She still maintained her perfect appearance and followed all regulations, but inside she was struggling more each day. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning during a particularly challenging training exercise. Colonel Davidson had assigned Maria's unit to work with a group of new recruits who had arrived at Fort Henderson just 1 week earlier. The exercise involved navigating an obstacle course while carrying heavy equipment. It was designed to test both physical strength and mental toughness. Maria was demonstrating proper technique to the new soldiers when she noticed them whispering among themselves. She tried to ignore it and focus on the training, but she could feel their eyes on her constantly. These new recruits had obviously heard the stories about her scar. Even soldiers who had never seen her before were treating her differently because of rumors and gossip. Private Thompson was one of the new recruits. He was 18 years old and came from a small town in Georgia. Thompson was tall and strong, but he had an arrogant attitude that made him unpopular with the other soldiers. He seemed to think that his physical size made him better than everyone else. During the obstacle course exercise, Thompson was struggling with one particular section. Maria approached him to offer guidance as she had been instructed to do with all the new recruits. "Thompson, you need to adjust your grip on the rope," she said in her usual professional tone. "Keep your hands closer together and use your legs more to support your weight." Thompson looked at her with a smirk that made Maria uncomfortable. Instead of following her instruction, he dropped from the rope and faced her directly. Several other soldiers stopped their training to watch the interaction. "I don't think I need advice from someone who can't even take care of herself," Thompson said loudly. His voice carried across the training area, causing more soldiers to stop and listen. "Maybe you should worry about your own problems before trying to help other people." Maria felt her heart start beating faster. She knew Thompson was referring to her scar, even though he was not saying it directly. She tried to keep her voice calm and professional. "Private Thompson, I am your instructor for this exercise," she said firmly. "You will follow my directions and show proper respect for your superior officer." But Thompson was not finished. The attention he was getting from the other soldiers seemed to encourage him. He stepped closer to Maria, his voice getting louder and more disrespectful. "Superior officer?" He laughed. "You think being damaged makes you superior? I heard all about you and that ugly scar across your stomach. Whatever happened to you before you got here, it proves you can't handle yourself in dangerous situations." The words hit Maria like physical blows. Several soldiers gasped at Thompson's disrespectful language. David Chen started moving toward them, his face showing anger at how Thompson was treating Maria. But Maria held up her hand to stop David from interfering. Thompson continued his attack, seemingly unaware of how angry he was making everyone around him. "My dad always told me that soldiers with scars like that are damaged goods. They shouldn't be in combat situations because they already proved they can't protect themselves. How are you supposed to protect other people if you couldn't even protect yourself?" Something inside Maria snapped at those words. All the weeks of whispers, stares, and changed treatment had been building up inside her like pressure in a steam engine. Thompson's cruel words were the final straw that broke her self-control. "What did you just say to me?" Maria's voice was dangerously quiet. The other soldiers could hear the anger underneath her calm tone. She took a step closer to Thompson, her eyes fixed directly on his face. Thompson, encouraged by what he thought was success in getting under her skin, made his biggest mistake. "I said you're damaged goods, Sergeant. Everyone knows something bad happened to you, and now you're trying to act tough to make up for being weak before. But we all know the truth about people like you." Maria's military training had taught her to control her emotions in all situations. She had learned to stay calm under pressure and to handle difficult people with professionalism. But Thompson's words about being weak and damaged goods destroyed all of that training in an instant. "Repeat what you just said," Maria demanded, her voice now carrying across the entire training area. "Look me in the eyes and say those words again." The challenge in her voice was unmistakable. Every soldier in the area stopped what they were doing to watch. Thompson realized he had gone too far, but his pride would not let him back down in front of so many people. "I said you're damaged goods who shouldn't be teaching real soldiers anything," Thompson replied, but his voice was less confident than before. He could see the anger in Maria's eyes and was beginning to understand that he had made a serious mistake. Maria took another step closer to Thompson. She was several inches shorter than him, but her presence seemed much larger than his in that moment. Her voice was steady but filled with controlled fury. "You know nothing about me or what I have been through," she said clearly. "You are a disrespectful child who thinks his size makes him important. You want to question my ability to handle dangerous situations? Let's find out right now how well you handle one." The confrontation was escalating quickly. More soldiers were gathering around them, forming a circle. Some looked excited at the possibility of seeing a fight. Others looked worried about what might happen next. David Chen was pushing through the crowd, trying to reach Maria before the situation got completely out of control. Thompson, realizing that he was now in a very dangerous position, tried to change his approach. "Look, Sergeant, I didn't mean anything personal by what I said. I was just making conversation." But Maria was far beyond accepting any apology from him. Weeks of bottled-up frustration and anger were pouring out of her. She stepped even closer to Thompson, forcing him to back up slightly. "Making conversation?" she repeated. "You called me damaged goods. You said I was weak and couldn't protect myself or others. You questioned my ability to serve in the military. Was that all just conversation to you?" Thompson was now clearly nervous. He looked around at the crowd of soldiers watching them, hoping someone would intervene. But everyone seemed frozen, waiting to see what would happen next. Maria had always been respected as a strong and capable leader, but none of them had ever seen her truly angry before. "I think we should just forget this whole thing happened," Thompson said weakly. "Maybe we can start over and be professional about this." Maria laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Professional? You want to be professional now? After you insulted my character, my service record, and my fitness to be a soldier? After you called me damaged goods in front of my entire unit?" At that moment, Colonel Davidson appeared at the edge of the crowd. He had heard the commotion from across the training grounds and had come to investigate. When he saw Maria confronting Thompson with dozens of soldiers watching, he knew the situation was serious. But instead of immediately stepping in to stop the confrontation, Colonel Davidson hesitated. He stood at the back of the crowd, watching Maria with an expression that was difficult to read. Some of the soldiers noticed his arrival and expected him to break up the confrontation immediately, but the colonel remained silent, his eyes focused intently on Maria. The standoff between Maria and Thompson continued for several more tense moments. Maria was clearly waiting for Thompson to repeat his insults so she could respond appropriately. Thompson was desperately looking for a way out of the situation without losing face completely in front of so many soldiers. Finally, Colonel Davidson stepped forward and spoke in his commanding voice that cut through all the tension. "Sergeant Santos, report to my office immediately," he ordered. His tone was stern but not angry. "Private Thompson, you will remain here for additional training exercises." Maria looked at the colonel with surprise. She had expected him to discipline both of them equally. Instead, he seemed to be giving her an opportunity to leave the confrontation with her dignity intact. She nodded respectfully and began walking toward his office, leaving Thompson standing alone in the center of the crowd. As Maria walked away, she could hear the conversation starting behind her. Some soldiers were discussing what Thompson had said. Others were talking about how Maria had handled the situation. But Maria was not listening to any of it. She was focused entirely on the upcoming conversation with Colonel Davidson, knowing that this meeting would determine what happened to her military career. The walk to Colonel Davidson's office felt like the longest journey of Maria's life. Her heart was still pounding from the confrontation with Thompson, but now a different kind of nervousness was taking over. She had never been called to the colonel's office for disciplinary reasons before. Her record had been spotless for 3 years. Now she wondered if her military career was about to end because she had lost control of her temper. The hallway leading to the colonel's office was quiet except for the sound of Maria's boots on the polished floor. She passed several other offices where she could hear the normal sounds of military administration. Phones ringing, keyboards typing, voices discussing routine business. Everything seemed normal except for the storm of emotions raging inside her. When Maria reached the colonel's office, she knocked twice on the heavy wooden door and waited for permission to enter. Colonel Davidson's voice came through the door, calm and measured as always. "Come in, Sergeant Santos." Maria opened the door and stepped inside. The office was exactly as she remembered from the few times she had been there for positive reasons. Awards and commendations covered the walls. A large desk dominated the center of the room. Behind it sat Colonel Davidson, looking as composed and professional as ever. But something in his expression seemed different than usual. "Close the door and have a seat," the colonel said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Maria followed his instructions and sat down, keeping her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. She waited for him to speak first, as military protocol required. Colonel Davidson studied her face for a long moment before speaking. When he finally broke the silence, his voice was gentler than Maria had expected. "Sergeant Santos, you have served under my command for 3 years. In that time, you have been one of my most reliable and professional soldiers. Your record is exceptional. Your leadership abilities are outstanding, which is why what happened today concerns me greatly." Maria felt her stomach tighten. She knew she had acted unprofessionally by confronting Thompson so aggressively. Even though Thompson had been completely out of line, she was the superior officer and should have handled the situation differently. "Sir, I take full responsibility for losing my temper during the training exercise," Maria said formally. "Private Thompson's comments were inappropriate, but I should have handled the situation through proper channels instead of confronting him directly." Colonel Davidson nodded slowly. "Private Thompson's behavior was completely unacceptable, and he will face appropriate consequences for his disrespectful conduct. But that is not why I called you here." This surprised Maria. She had assumed the meeting was about her confrontation with Thompson. If that was not the reason, she could not imagine what else the colonel wanted to discuss. "Sir, I don't understand," Maria said honestly. Colonel Davidson leaned back in his chair and was quiet for several moments. When he spoke again, his voice was even more gentle than before. "Maria, I think it's time we talked about what happened during the inspection 3 weeks ago." Maria felt her breath catch in her throat. This was the conversation she had been dreading since the day her scar was revealed. She had hoped that Colonel Davidson would simply ignore what he had seen and continue treating her as he always had. But now she realized that was impossible. "I have been in the military for over 20 years, the colonel continued. "I have seen many different kinds of injuries and scars. But when I saw yours during the inspection, I knew immediately that it was not from any military training or combat situation. I also knew that it represented something painful from your past." Maria stared down at her hands, unable to meet the colonel's eyes. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling around her, and there seemed to be no way to stop it. "I want you to know that you are under no obligation to tell me anything about your personal life before you joined the Army," Colonel Davidson said carefully. "But I also want you to know that if you choose to share your story, it will remain completely confidential. Nothing you say will leave this room or affect your military career in any way." The kindness in his voice almost broke Maria's composure. She had expected anger or disappointment. Instead, the colonel was offering her understanding and privacy. For the first time in 3 weeks, she felt like someone was treating her with genuine respect. Maria took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. She looked up and met Colonel Davidson's eyes directly. "Sir, the scar came from an attack that happened 5 years ago before I joined the Army." Once she started talking, the words seemed to pour out of her. Maria told Colonel Davidson about working at the diner in her hometown. She described the night she was walking home, and how a man had jumped out from between 2 buildings. She explained how he had attacked her with a broken bottle, cutting across her stomach before she managed to fight him off and escape. Her voice remained steady as she continued the story. She told him about going to the hospital alone and refusing to call the police because she was too ashamed and scared. She described the months of recovery and how the scar served as a daily reminder of the worst night of her life. "I never told anyone the complete truth about that night," Maria said quietly. "Not my family, not my friends, and not anyone in the military. I was afraid that people would see me as a victim instead of a strong person. I was afraid they would think I was weak or damaged." Colonel Davidson listened to every word without interrupting. His expression remained calm and attentive throughout Maria's story. When she finished speaking, there was a long silence in the office. Finally, the colonel leaned forward and spoke with more emotion in his voice than Maria had ever heard before. "Maria, what you have just described to me is not the story of a victim. It is the story of a survivor. You fought off an attacker and saved your own life. You recovered from serious injuries without support from others. You used that experience to motivate yourself to become stronger and to serve your country. That does not sound like weakness to me. That sounds like extraordinary courage." Maria felt tears forming in her eyes, but she fought to keep them from falling. She had never thought about her experience in those terms before. For 5 years, she had seen the attack as evidence of her weakness and vulnerability. Hearing Colonel Davidson describe it as courage was almost overwhelming. "But I was a victim," Maria said quietly. "I couldn't protect myself that night. I was helpless." "You were attacked by surprise by someone who was probably stronger and larger than you," the colonel replied firmly. But you did protect yourself. You fought back and escaped. You survived. And then you turned that terrible experience into motivation to become one of the finest soldiers I have ever commanded." The tears that Maria had been fighting finally began to fall. She wiped them away quickly, embarrassed to show such emotion in front of her commanding officer. "Sir, I'm sorry for breaking down like this," she said. "You have nothing to apologize for," Colonel Davidson replied. "You have carried this burden alone for 5 years. That takes incredible strength, but you don't have to carry it alone anymore." The colonel opened his desk drawer and pulled out a business card. He handed it to Maria across the desk. "This is the contact information for Dr. Sarah Mitchell. She is a counselor who works with military personnel. She has helped many soldiers deal with difficult experiences from their past. I think talking to her might be helpful for you." Maria looked at the card in her hands. The idea of talking to a counselor about her attack had never occurred to her before. "This is not an order," Colonel Davidson clarified. "It is simply a suggestion from someone who cares about your well-being. The choice is entirely yours." "Thank you, sir," Maria said softly. "I'll consider it." Colonel Davidson stood up from his chair, indicating that their meeting was coming to an end. Maria stood as well, preparing to leave. But before she reached the door, the colonel spoke again. "Maria, I owe you an apology." She turned back to face him with surprise. "Sir?" "When I saw your scar during the inspection, I reacted poorly. I allowed my own assumptions and discomfort to affect how I treated you. I assigned you to desk duties instead of your normal responsibilities. I avoided eye contact during formations. I let my reaction to learning something new about you change how I viewed you as a soldier. That was wrong of me." Maria was shocked by his admission. She had never expected Colonel Davidson to acknowledge his changed behavior, much less apologize for it. "You are the same excellent soldier you were before the inspection," he continued. "Your past experiences, whatever they may be, do not diminish your value or your capabilities. From now on, I will treat you exactly as I always have. You have my word on that." "Thank you, sir," Maria said, feeling a weight lifting from her shoulders that she had not even realized was there. As Maria left the colonel's office and walked back toward the barracks, she felt different than she had in weeks. For the first time since the inspection, someone had seen her scar and her story not as evidence of weakness or damage, but as proof of strength and survival. It would take time for her to fully accept that view of herself. But Colonel Davidson had planted a seed that might eventually grow into healing. 2 months had passed since Maria's conversation with Colonel Davidson, and life at Fort Henderson had changed in ways she never expected. The transformation did not happen overnight, but gradually, like the slow change of seasons. Maria was discovering that healing was not a destination, but a journey that required patience and courage. The first major change came 3 days after her meeting with the colonel. Maria had decided to call Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the counselor whose card Colonel Davidson had given her. The phone call was difficult, but Dr. Mitchell's warm and professional voice made it easier than Maria had anticipated. They scheduled their first meeting for the following week. Dr. Mitchell's office was located in a quiet building near the base. It was decorated with soft colors and comfortable furniture that made Maria feel more relaxed than she had expected. During their first session, Maria found herself telling the complete story of her attack for the second time in her life. But this time she was talking to someone who was trained to help people process traumatic experiences. "Maria, what happened to you was a serious trauma," Dr. Mitchell explained during one of their early sessions. "It's completely normal that it has affected how you see yourself and how you interact with the world. But trauma does not define who you are. It's something that happened to you, not something that is fundamentally wrong with you." These conversations helped Maria begin to understand her own reactions and feelings. She learned that her need to be perfect and to hide her scar were common responses to trauma. She also learned that her decision to join the military and become stronger was actually a very healthy way of taking back control of her life. Meanwhile, changes were happening at the base as well. Colonel Davidson had kept his promise to treat Maria exactly as he always had. During the morning formation after their conversation, he looked directly at her when giving assignments. He gave her challenging outdoor training exercises instead of desk duty. Most importantly, he continued to use her as an example for new recruits, praising her leadership skills and dedication. The other soldiers noticed the colonel's return to normal behavior, and it had a powerful effect. If Colonel Davidson saw Maria as the same capable soldier she had always been, then maybe their changed attitudes were wrong. Slowly, people began treating her more normally. David Chen was the first to completely return to his old way of interacting with Maria. One morning at breakfast, he sat down across from her with a big smile on his face. "Santos, you look like you're feeling better these days," he said in his usual cheerful voice. "I was thinking we could sign up for that advanced tactical training course next month. You're always better at that stuff than I am, and I could use your help." Maria smiled back at him. It felt wonderful to hear him talking to her like a normal friend instead of someone who needed special care. "I'd be happy to help you with the tactical training, Chen. But don't expect me to go easy on you just because we're friends." "I wouldn't want it any other way," David laughed. This was the kind of normal conversation Maria had missed desperately during the weeks after her scar was revealed. The change with her fellow soldiers was more gradual but equally important. Private Garcia stopped speaking to Maria in soft, careful tones. Lieutenant Parker no longer offered unnecessary help with tasks Maria could easily handle herself. The female soldiers in the barracks began including Maria in their regular conversations and activities instead of treating her like someone who needed protection. But perhaps the most significant change came from an unexpected source. Private Thompson, the recruit who had made the cruel comments about Maria being damaged goods, requested a private meeting with her. 4 weeks after their confrontation, Maria agreed to meet with Thompson in one of the base conference rooms. She was curious about what he wanted to say, but she was also prepared for the possibility that he might cause more problems. Thompson looked nervous when he entered the room. He stood at attention until Maria told him to sit down. When he spoke, his voice was much different than it had been during their confrontation. "Sergeant Santos, I want to apologize for what I said during the training exercise," he began. "My words were completely inappropriate and disrespectful. I had no right to make comments about your personal life or to question your abilities as a soldier." Maria studied his face, trying to determine if his apology was genuine. Thompson seemed sincere, but she wanted to understand what had caused his change in attitude. "What made you decide to apologize, Thompson?" she asked directly. Thompson looked down at his hands before answering. "After our confrontation, several of the other soldiers told me about your reputation on the base. They explained that you are one of the most respected sergeants here, and that you have helped train dozens of new recruits over the years. They also told me that whatever happened to you in the past, it made you stronger, not weaker." He paused for a moment before continuing. "I also talked to my father about what happened. He's a veteran himself, and he told me that real soldiers respect each other based on their service and character, not on what scars they might have. He was very disappointed in my behavior." Maria appreciated Thompson's apology, but she wanted to make sure he truly understood the impact of his words. "Thompson, when you called me damaged goods, you were not just insulting me personally. You were suggesting that anyone who has been through difficult experiences is somehow less worthy of respect or opportunity. That kind of thinking is dangerous and wrong." "I understand that now, Sergeant," Thompson replied. "I was ignorant and cruel, and I'm committed to being better. If you're willing to give me another chance, I would be honored to learn from you." Maria considered his words carefully. She could see that Thompson was genuinely remorseful and seemed committed to changing his attitude. Forgiveness was something Dr. Mitchell had been helping her work on, not for other people's benefit, but for her own healing. "I accept your apology, Thompson," Maria said finally. "But if you truly want to learn from me, then you need to understand that strength comes in many different forms. Some of the strongest people I know are those who have survived difficult experiences and used them to become better." The conversation with Thompson marked another turning point in Maria's journey. She realized that she was no longer hiding from her past or feeling ashamed of her scar. Instead, she was beginning to see it as part of her story of survival and growth. Colonel Davidson also played a role in changing the overall atmosphere on the base. 2 weeks after his conversation with Maria, he addressed the entire battalion during a regular morning formation. His speech was about respect, assumptions, and the many different forms that courage could take. "Soldiers," he said in his commanding voice that carried across the silent crowd, "we serve together as brothers and sisters in arms. Each person here has a unique story and unique experiences that brought them to military service. Some of those experiences were positive. Others were difficult or painful. but every person who chooses to serve their country deserves our respect and support, regardless of what challenges they may have faced in their past," he continued. "True strength is not about avoiding difficulty or pain. True strength is about facing challenges, learning from them, and using those experiences to serve others." Some of the strongest warriors in history were people who had been through terrible experiences and chose to use that knowledge to protect others from similar harm. The colonel's speech had a powerful impact on the entire base. It sent a clear message that judging soldiers based on their past experiences or physical scars was not acceptable behavior. It also reinforced the military values of respect, honor, and mutual support. As the weeks passed, Maria found herself becoming more open about her experiences. She did not share her complete story with everyone, but she stopped trying to hide her scar or change the subject when people had questions. She learned that most people were more understanding and respectful than she had expected them to be. During a training exercise with new recruits 3 months after the inspection, one young soldier noticed Maria's scar during a medical demonstration. Instead of staring or making inappropriate comments, the soldier quietly asked if Maria was okay and if there was anything she needed. "I'm fine," Maria replied with a genuine smile. "This scar is old history. It reminds me that I'm stronger than I used to think I was." The recruit nodded respectfully and continued with the training exercise. This simple interaction showed Maria how much things had changed. The scar that had once been a source of shame and secrecy had become something she could acknowledge without fear or embarrassment. Dr. Mitchell helped Maria understand that her journey of healing would continue throughout her life. Some days would be easier than others. There would still be moments when the memories of that terrible night would surface and cause pain. But Maria had learned that she did not have to face those moments alone anymore.